So Corey and I had a little conversation earlier this week, and I told him, I said, I'm really excited for this because every single time Corey and I have ever had a conversation, it's like sitting down at the coffee shop with like your old high school buddy, just hanging out, relaxing. And so I'm really stoked. Corey, I love any opportunity that we get to chat and hang out. So this is actually very selfish on my part. I just wanted to hang out with you. So
I just love that we get paid to do this. Like we literally get paid to
absolutely.
sit around and just talk all day. So I'm here for
Don't tell the
it.
secrets. Don't tell the
Exactly. Let me
secrets.
don't say anything else.
So, Corey, for those who are in chat who have no idea who you are, why don't you go ahead and just do a quick intro?
Yeah, the way I usually do this as a fellow streamer myself. What's up, folks? My name is Corey Hurricane Weathers, .NET developer evangelist extraordinaire from phenomenal company named Twilio. But there's like so much more to the story than just that. So my background is one where I've just been in the industry for a really long time. Got my first paid gig in 2005, joined Microsoft fresh out of college, worked for the federal government, worked for a number of other companies before I came to Twilio in a bunch of different roles. Man. Um, and yeah, so that's like the surface level about me. That's the surface level about me.
Yeah, that's very very surface level. So I do get the privilege of working with Corey at this wonderful company called Twilio. So we get to hang out a lot. So Corey, I don't think that you and I have actually ever had this like full conversation of like where did Corey start? What,
Mm.
when you were a kid, like what did you dream of doing? And then what was, essentially like the journey like moving into, this thing called science and technology and programming and all of that kind of stuff. Like where did this happen at?
Yeah, I grew up dirt poor, and I always say this because I think it's important not to sort of hide that part of the story. Yeah, I grew up the fourth of six kids to my dad, and we grew up in. We weren't. My dad worked incredibly hard, but there were a lot of us, so we didn't have means. But he did well to take care of us financially. And so one of the things that he did very early on in our lives was he bought us a computer for the house because we never went to the library to do any research. Never, the internet wasn't a thing. America Online
What?
didn't become a thing until
No
later on.
internet?
Yeah, right.
How do
I
you
know,
even do
right?
anything without internet? How is that even
I
possible?
Let me tell you the story about how me and Wolfenstein were the best of friends. This is actually how I ended up spending too much time on the computer because the first game that I really got into was Wolfenstein. And I still love that game. Like, I'll play Wolfenstein all day. I don't know if there's any folks in chat who do the Wolfenstein thing, but I love Wolfenstein. But yeah, so we did that. And then that's right, Wolf 3D on floppy disks all day. Um, but yeah, he always said to me, like, dude, don't break the computer because we never had money. So silly me, always go break the computer. And more because I was fascinated. When I was a kid, I think the thing that I would say most about my childhood that is appropriate to say is I was an incredibly curious kid. Um, so I learned how to play the piano in that time. I realized that I couldn't draw. Like that was a terrible way for me to be artistic, but playing on the
Same.
computer was always fun, right? So yeah, once I got that interest in computers, when it was time to go to college, I was like, okay, it's either going to be music or computer science. And sure enough, I picked computer science, but I should have picked both because I still play the piano to this day. Um, and then from there, I did undergrad at Howard. Shout out to the good old HU. I did my undergrad at Howard and learned a ton about how to actually program correctly. Because prior to that, everyone was doing like GeoCities, and, HTML and CSS. I don't know. Wait, I don't even know if the chat room is old enough to remember that.
They probably don't remember GeoCities.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, am I like? Because now I feel like the old guy. I don't know how many people actually played around with GeoCity pages and CSS.
So
Um,
did you happen to see the demo that I did for Tweak Week at Twilio?
I did not.
So for everybody for reference, so Tweak Week at Twilio is Twilio's like internal hackathon that they do, and I was able to be on part of the team who helped manage and organize everything. So
Which
what
they
I
did an amazing
did
job, by the way.
The team did fantastic. Huge shout out to Tilda and Liz and the entire planning team behind all of that. But so one of the things that we did was we did rock out like it's 1990s and was kind of like the theme. And so what I did was I built a poll with Twilio SMS and WhatsApp, and people could text in what Twilio magic value lined up with what they were hacking on. And then what I did was I built a front end website that was like very geosites, like super cheesy retro with like the animated GIF background. And it had like the twinkly stars.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
I was like, back in the 90s, we didn't have automatic refresh. So you actually had to like refresh the page to see
Right.
the updates as the vote came in. And it was like this like really nice disguise for like my laziness. Because I wasn't gonna put automatic refresh on this thing. I was like, back in the day, we didn't have automatic refresh.
No,
Get out of
we did
here.
not. We did not.
So,
Man,
so for these youngsters who don't remember, geosites were like the crap back in the day. They were amazing.
man, it's funny too because everyone it feels like everyone was either on it or they weren't. Like it wasn't an in between. Like you either had a page or you didn't, and you
Yeah.
just were out of the loop. And I legitimately, I remember that was how I actually learned about HTML and CSS. I hadn't delved into JavaScript until I went to Microsoft for my internship. But that was how I learned about the internet. Man,
Yeah,
that
so
was
how many people in chat learned about HTML and CSS by hacking their MySpace page?
right. Exactly.
And at the time, I didn't even realize what I was doing. I was just like copying crap, and people were like, "Oh yeah, you can put this on your page, and it like changes everything." And we all thought it was the coolest thing. So like everybody had like your top 8, and if you weren't in the top 8, you weren't like the good friend, and you'd get like
Oh yeah.
nasty letters or like people like messing with you in the hall because we didn't have cell phones back then, and people were all like, "Hey, why am I not in your top 8? Why am I not in the second spot? Why is James in the second spot? What the heck? What's going on?" And that was like the easiest way to start beef with somebody was to remove them from your top
From the
8.
top.
Like you've been demoted because of that stupid fight that we had. Get out of here. Oh, you took so and so out of your top 8.
Well, but it's funny because so one of the things a lot of folks know about me is I'm also a parent to two young children who've just turned 7 and 5. And my daughter is 7. She's going through this thing now where like popularity is a concept that's becoming real to her. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated by this, like as a father watching her, the black kid in a school that's not predominantly black, like struggle through this. And my daughter, and I say struggle through this because my daughter is someone who she's like me in that she just is a magnet for attention. Like people will just flock to her. The problem is when she doesn't get her way, she almost kind of turns into like one of those mean girls. So
Uh-oh.
I gotta be like, wait, hold on, pause. Like, let's not do that. We're not gonna do that. Like, let's just not do that. So it's been interesting watching like, this notion of like the top 8. Yeah, it's very different today, boy.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I I was not popular in school. I know that's a big shocker to everybody. Um
Record
I
scratch.
was yeah, I was the little fat kid who wasn't super athletic, who sat inside and played video games,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. So I also have a 7-year-old who is currently coming home and telling me about all of the second grader drama that they're currently having. And so like she did the whole, "Oh, daddy, so and so on the playground, so and so told me that so and so didn't like them anymore." And I'm like, "You're in second grade.
Yup.
What are you doing?" I'm like, "You're not allowed to talk to boys. The only
Yup.
the only men in your life are me and Jesus. Stop.
And that's it.
Done.
Leave it
That's
be.
it." I'm like, "I don't want to hear nothing about like boys liking people and all of this stuff. Like, you're way too young for that. Stop it."
Well, and a buddy of mine who I did my undergrad with, I'm gonna tell a story later about me, my space. But a buddy of mine who I did my undergrad with, his name is Patrick Jackson. Shout out to Pat Jack. He had his first child when he was, God, I think 22, 23. Him and his wife. And when his daughter turned 9, I was like, dude, how's it going? He's like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not built for this. I don't know anything about this. The change happened so quickly. I don't know what to do with myself. And I just sat back and I was like, ooh, good luck. And then we found
Yeah.
out that my daughter was coming. And then he was like, dude, welcome to the club. And I every day I'm on I'm not ready for this. I don't know what this is.
It's funny how like when people like people who were parents before you. So like we had some really good friends of ours who had both of their boys before we ever had our daughter.
Mhm.
And man, I called my friend Jason and I was all like, "Hey man, we're gonna have a kid and it's a girl and da 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 da." And he just sat back and he goes, "Oh, it's coming. It's coming. You're gonna get it." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then you become a parent and
And
you
you're like,
you
oh yeah,
realize,
it
like,
got real.
yeah, I got you. I got you.
Well, but this is so okay, wait, let me take a step back now because we were talking about me in college. And one of the things that I realized when I was like just thinking back to college days, everyone was doing like the 10-year challenge a couple years ago, or man, a couple of weeks ago. And I was thinking back to the fact that like when I was in college, I had no idea like what I was going to do with my life. I knew I was doing computer science, but I didn't really know enough about the industry to be like, all right, I want to be a developer or like I want to be a tester. Like I didn't know anything.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I remember getting to a point where when I was in college, I dated my ex-wife. We were together for a very long time while I was in college. And I remember us getting to a point being like, all right, so like, is it time for us to like figure out like what we're gonna do in this thing? Because like with parenting, you sort of just be like, all right, look, we're gonna react to these kids. We got some basic things we're gonna do, but we're gonna react. When it
Yeah.
comes to your career, you're sort of like, I gotta take control of things. I got to a point where I had no idea what the hell I was doing. All I knew was like I did the Microsoft internship, which was ball. Um, and then I had some issues back at college and they were trying to like delay my graduation. It ended up happening. So then I went to work for the IRS, which was a terrible idea. Um, and then I worked for the university. And then like me and my ex-wife at the time, we were like, well, we should figure out like what you're doing as opposed to you just bouncing around doing a bunch of jobs. And so now I'm sort
Yeah.
of at this point where I just wish that I had more people around at that time to tell me, no, don't do that. Do this. Right. But
Well,
eh,
and it seems like you have a lot of people who get into computer science because, like, I did the exact same thing. I knew that I started out as a music major, and then my wife and I started dating, and she was like, "So, what are you gonna do with that music major?" And I'm super, super young. So, for context, everybody in the chat, my wife and I got married. I was 19 when we got married,
oh, young
and
love. Come
so
on. Come
and
on.
so, like, she was like, "So what are you gonna do with this music major?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just want to play music." And I was in a band at the time, and she was like, maybe you need to rethink that major." I was like, "Why?"
Mm,
And she was like, "Well, if you don't want to teach and you're not really sure how you're gonna make money, yeah, you might want to rethink this." And because I was like, I don't want to teach at all. I don't want to deal with people. Like, I just don't want to do this. And so, I looked at going and getting like a generic business degree because, like, that kind of translates to whatever. Because a lot of
right.
times people get jobs and stuff that their degree doesn't actually translate to,
That's
you
right.
know? And so I got this generic business degree that I'm working on for like a semester. And I came home one day and I was like, I can't do this.
This
I
isn't
can't
it.
sit behind a desk doing this stuff all day long. I'm taking like Excel classes and stuff, and I want to, just beat my head against the wall. And so it was like, well, you're always tinkering with your computer and stuff. Have you ever thought about doing like a computer science degree? And my immediate response to that was, I'm not smart enough to do a computer science degree.
Right. Okay.
Like, what the
Okay.
heck? Like,
Yeah.
only really smart people get computer science degrees. Like, I
Yes.
can't do that.
Yup.
And that was my initial reaction to it. And I mean, I managed. Was it hard? Absolutely. But I managed to get there. Um, and I'm super thankful that I was able to land an internship at a company that I actually had a career with long term for 13 years. But you know, I've told everybody in chat before, like, when I started out in computer science, like, my intro C++ class was me grinding for 8 to 16 hours on the weekend just trying to complete a single assignment.
I know this experience. God, Chris, we are so similar because I'm going to tell you, me and Pat Jack, so Patrick and I did all of our classes together. And this will make sense to you because we had an intro to CSS, a C++ class,
Yeah.
and then we had a lab component. And the intro to C++ was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 hours. The lab was Tuesday morning. And the lab was really just to reinforce what you were learning in the class, right? And the thing is, like, the lab was a long, like, period of time to reinforce stuff. And we figured out that if you just completed the assignments ahead of time, you didn't have to stay in the lab. So me and Pat Jack, this was before, like, this was like at the point, I don't know how many like computer science majors are in chat. The folks who are computer science majors will understand this. Computer science, to your point, Chris, is like incredibly hard as a major. Like, I really feel like they try to weed you out, right? And so you'll start your freshman year with like, I don't know, 100 people. And then
Yeah.
you'll end freshman year with like 30 people. Like, it's that real. And so me and Pat, because it's a large class of people, we would walk into lab 8 o'clock in the morning, because it was 8 o'clock in the morning. We would just hand in our assignments once we figured out that all you had to do is hand in your assignment. And then we would go back to go to McDonald's, get some breakfast, and then go to bed. And the thing that a lot of people would be like is like, yo, how did y'all just walk in and then walk right back out? Like, what are y'all doing? And it was the exact same thing. We would grind out. We would split up the projects. We would grind out on the weekends or at night. And then we would show up that Tuesday and then everything would be done.
Yeah, so I'm going to throw this up in featured chat. So Antherium made a comment here. Kind of wish I would have gotten a CS degree because I feel like I have some knowledge gaps. But also at this point, it would slow down my career to stop and go back to school. So YOLO.
YOLO. Yeah,
So,
shout
I
out
mean,
to that.
so in my experience, I got a lot of basics from my actual CS degree when it comes to understanding data structures, and then you have to go through like an algorithms class where they explain like what algorithms are and how they work, and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff, and you understand. I did like you know discrete math, and I did all of that kind of stuff, and you basically get to the point where you understand all of the basic programming concepts, but I don't necessarily think that I gained anything from my degree that was more valuable than what I actually got with hands-on experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you have so many people who, when they come out of university, they have this degree. It's, probably took them, for, if you're like me, it took me 5 years to finally graduate. And, you're looking for a job and everybody's like, yeah, junior developer, 3 to 5 years experience.
Yeah. There's sort of two thoughts that go through my mind now. And I'm firmly of the opinion that degrees, the value, the financial value of degrees are going to continue to decline over time. I'm 100% of that opinion.
Yeah.
But specifically as it relates to computer science, there are two things that I think happened that sort of changed the way that the degree delivered value. I think the first is the internet, because like if the internet wasn't the thing and we weren't here live, streaming through your browsers, a lot of folks who were programmers were still probably be trained as if they were like getting deep into operating system fundamentals, which makes sense in a day and age before the internet. Now that the internet has sort of become more ubiquitous, it has changed the way we build applications fundamentally. And because that's the case, I just don't think the same approach to how we teach computer science applies. But then the second change to this is mobile devices, like the notion of what does it mean for us to have the power of computing at our hand, as
Mm,
opposed to I'm going to sit down at a workstation and do this particular type of knowledge work or type of role and see what happens. You build
yeah.
software very differently. And what mobile taught us was that we needed to be flexible. What the internet taught us was we needed to be accessible. And it changed the way we do computer science. That's my fundamental opinion. Now, someone in the chat room is probably going to be like, yo, Corey's wrong. And that's okay. You can have your own opinion. But yeah,
They can have a wrong opinion. That's fine.
that's all right. That's all right.
So Finite actually has a really good point here. He says, I think one of the big advantages to a CS degree is that it trains you to think a certain way, thinking about algorithms, program structure, etc. Directly out of school, I think can accelerate your real world quote on the job learning. And I agree with that in a large aspect. And I think what I have heard from a lot of people and what I tend to say is doing college or like a formal university degree is when you come out of the university with your degree, I think it's more of you basically just showed the world that you know how to learn and you know how to stick with something. I don't necessarily think that your degree is I am now an expert in this thing,
Yep.
so you should hire me to do it. I think it's because, like, for me, when I first started in college, I had to learn how to do college. I had to learn how to study appropriately for college. I had to learn how to stay on top of my assignments and manage my time appropriately and all of those kinds of things. Like, that for me took me about a year to really get into a groove. And, if you go back and you look at like my high school records and stuff, I was not the most studious person in high school. I did
Yep.
not make straight A's. I was not top of my class. I mean, most of the time when I was in high school, I was just showing up and doing what I needed to do to pass.
Yep.
And I didn't really start thinking about anything beyond high school until senior year. And I was like, oh crap, I actually need to do something with myself.
Yeah, this is one I always struggle with degrees because the thing that I tell people now when they tell me they want to get into tech, they'll ask me, okay, like you've been in tech for a long time. How do I get into tech? And I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, well, my first question to you is how do you learn best? And I always start there because I think what I struggle with degrees is that's one way to learn. It's not the way to learn. Pluralsight, YouTube, LinkedIn Learning, a number of these other programs and platforms have made it so accessible to access the content. That's the other thing that the internet has done, right? It's sort of equalized access to the content for those who have access to the internet. So prior to the internet, like I was talking about this, I think yesterday or 2 days ago on a stream, where like the way that you learned was by buying that big book that taught you like how to do C++. Mine is right here on my shelf. I still have it, even though I haven't written a line in C++ since probably 2012. Right? Like,
absolutely.
but that's like, it changes the way you learn. And so I think what I appreciate now is that you can get access to the knowledge and the learning without having to go to college. Um, in a way that's way more accessible as opposed to the oh well, you got to be in the good old boys club to be able to gain access. If that's the case, people who look like me would have never made it. I'd be dead honest.
Well, and so I think that you're leaning into a really good point here that I kind of want to focus in on of what the internet has done for accessibility and availability to people who, you know, you want to say 30 years ago would not have had access to the same educational opportunities. Because
Yeah.
I come from a family where we didn't really have a lot of money. When I graduated high school, I had no money for college, but like I was right above the gap to where I didn't really qualify for financial aid.
Hmm.
And so like I went to community college and paid everything out of pocket because I couldn't afford loans and I had no credit, so I couldn't really get loans. And so I kind of did that. But then you have, so many people, not just here in the States, but like around the entire world that you just basically opened up this wealth of knowledge to them if they have availability to a computer and internet, which I think we're getting there where everybody has that.
Yeah. Finite's called that out as well in his comment where he talked about, it depends on how well you take advantage of the learning tools because my sense on this is twofold. For the folks who have access to the internet, I think it's incredibly empowering should they choose to use it in that way.
Yeah.
For the folks who don't have access to the internet, which I think COVID, if there's a good thing that came out of COVID, one of those good things is that it shined a light on inequities in this way. We've talked at length about food deserts in the United States. I know they exist well beyond the United States. Speaking to my own personal knowledge, we talked at length about food deserts and the access to quality produce to make sure that children have proper nutrition so that they can actually pay attention when they're in a classroom.
Yeah.
But no one ever thought about the scenario of what happens if the classroom shuts down. And so it's been incredibly interesting watching companies like Comcast and AT&T here in the States sort of say, no, we just need to give you free access to the internet. But even then, that doesn't, it's sort of like, yes, give me the access, but it doesn't quite say, and then here's what you do once you get on there. And this is where I think we struggle. We still haven't quite figured out how to support people where they are. And that's from a computer science perspective. Like, and I was someone who was super interested in ed tech for a long time. So I know a little bit about education technology and all the things there. I still feel like we miss like the fundamental like gaps of like, hey, someone gets a computer, they turn it on. What should they do? Like literally verbatim tell them just what's the thing they should be doing. Um, but that being said, this is why I still get excited because I still think the beauty of software to me is that it's never quite final. It's always changing. And so I always think about the Matrix because, the Matrix always says the ones and zeros. I'm like, this is literally how the world works when it comes to software. So yeah, just keep changing, keep doing what you need to do and keep learning and keep evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And so I think that, like, I mean, obviously, we realize that, here in the United States, like, I know that there are places where, people don't have as good of access. Like, thankfully, I live in a big city. We have fiber optic cable. I have access to, I think my uplink right now is like half a gig on my downstream. And so, like, yeah, I have super fast internet, and I mean, heck, I could do a ton of crap from my phone
But yeah,
because I can afford a phone. Um, but it's like my wife is an educator, and she's been an educator. I think this is her 17th year in education.
shout out to
Um,
that.
yeah, I mean, huge shout out to all the teachers and all the people, especially like in the pandemic and dealing with all this stuff. I think one of the problems that we have in the, specific, I can only specifically talk about this country because I've never lived anywhere else. Um, but we have people who are making rules and making legislation who have no background in education. And I think it's great what you were pointing out. We have companies who are willing to give people free access to internet. But okay, so you gave somebody free access to internet. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can pay their electric bill. That doesn't mean that they can afford a computer. And like you said, when they get that, what do they do with it? Like,
Yeah.
there really is no formalized class in public education that teaches people how to learn. There's no formalized class in public education that says this is how you appropriately research, this technical topic, and these are the places that you should learn that from. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot, because, like, as somebody who streams, I get a lot, you put yourself out there, you're public, and so a lot of people start, hitting you up and asking you questions like, "Hey, how do I get into this? Where do I start? I don't know what to do." And like, even my stream that I had on Tuesday, I had somebody in chat who was like, I've tried Python, I've tried JavaScript, I've tried Java, I've tried this. And every single time I just give up because I just can't do it." And I was like, well, first of all, let's ask the question as to what kind of programming are you interested in, or do you even know? And then what is leading you to jump from product to product? Why are you jumping from language to language? What's making you make these decisions? And let's talk about the reasoning behind that and figure out why you're taking the path that you're taking. And then let's talk about, okay, so you want to do XYZ, or you think you want to do XYZ. Let's start here.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I think, it's funny because I talk to boot camp folks who are about to graduate from all of the time. So I would guess I'd call them soon to be boot camp grads. And one of the things that I wish um, a lot of structured programs would do better is incorporate this notion of um, what does it mean to get a job into like their programs.
Yeah.
Um, from the very initial stage of here are the types of jobs that are out there. Here are the jobs that pay certain amounts of money in particular regions of the country. Here are the types of things you would do in these jobs, right? Like they just I didn't get this when I was an undergrad. I only learned this because I did my internship. And you learn by trial, right? Which um shout out to those who do get the privilege to do an internship. I still
Yeah.
think that pipeline works for the community that it serves, but it's not the universal pipeline that it should be. Folks who are early in their career. Um, and then at the same time, I think about like how we weed people out through the process. So I remember my interview process, and one of my mentors, phenomenal guy, whose name is Mario Pipkin. I love him. Mario is one of the reasons why I landed at Microsoft. He was very clear with me. It's like, dude, if it was anyone else, you wouldn't have gotten through. I took a chance on you. I, I don't know how many people start in the industry and know that, right? Like someone took a chance on them to give them a chance to grow their career. And in between Mario, another one of my mentors who I was talking to actually just a couple days ago, Mel Mitchell, they two black men, legitimately, who helped me really figure out how to navigate the world of Microsoft, which at that time was I want to say like 68,000 people. And here I was, a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kid from the projects in New York, had no context, but it was the help that I got, like, literally from Corey, "Okay, go try to go out and get these jobs," and then Corey, "Go through the interview process," and then Corey, "Go land the internship," and then do well on the internship to convert into a full-time, and God, how stressful that was, and we still do that. I don't I don't necessarily think that it's wrong, but I also don't think it's right or universal. That's the thing I struggle with.
So let's kind of, if you don't mind, let's talk about like what that process to Microsoft for you was. So, you kind of explained like what it was like, in school,
Yeah.
going to university, you come out, you have people who are mentoring you. Like, first question would be, how did the mentors find you or how did you find them? And then, like, what was that like getting into Microsoft at that time?
Yeah, I was one thing I've learned about myself is I'm both incredibly bold and incredibly shy. So when I got hired into my first internship, I had no idea of what to expect. And I remembered that that Mario came out to Howard, he did a talk, and he was on my interview process. There's another funny story in there. I won't tell it now, but I said to Mario when I got there, I said, "Yo, Mario, like I made it to Microsoft." And he's like, "Okay, great. I'm waiting for you to ask the question." I was like, "What question?" And he goes, "I need you to ask the question, like, why did you make it to Microsoft? Like, how did you make it to Microsoft? What are my expectations?" And I was like, "Okay, what are your expectations of me?" And he was very direct. He said, "Look, like, I expect you to grow and to do this incredibly well that you'll be able to do this for other people." And that was when I said, "Oh man, I need a mentor." Like, because I knew I needed help and I didn't know how to ask for help. But at that time, I had had other experiences where I'd been exposed to people who had been mentors. I was like, "Yo, I need a mentor." So Mario was like, "All right, like I got the time, let's get them set up." And what I learned from that mentorship experience was every mentorship should serve a purpose. Like, you don't walk in there unprepared. Don't waste their time. Don't just say, I need a mentor. Like, be very intentional about what you want to get out of that mentor. And if they're not the best fit, or if they're not serving your needs, like, let them know you need someone else to serve their needs. It's almost like a therapist, which is so interesting. Um,
Yeah.
but my first internship was great. It was just I was not managed well. And I didn't know that until I had my second internship at Microsoft where I realized what it was to have a good manager. Like you don't know what bad is until you experience bad, and you're like, or until you experience better. You're like, dang,
Yeah.
I should have gotten better. What do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, because you do have some people who are in situations where that's all that they know. They just assume that that's the way it is everywhere. And then you move into a different role and you're like, wait. Wait a minute.
Yep.
That was actually bad? Like,
Right.
I thought
Right.
everybody was like that.
Well, and then the other thing is too, and this is the part where like now it's different because interns, like when I interned, we interned for half of the year. So I went in January and then we ended in I think like June or July. And versus now, like interns go for the summer. And so you spend 6 months with someone, like it's like your first job. And they paid us very well. And they give us free rental cars and they give us a free place to live. We had all this unlimited snacks. Like you're like a kid in a freaking candy store. Like you really don't
Yeah.
know how good you got it until you step away. You go back to school. You're like, dang, like where's the free soda? Like, what's up? So it just
Yeah,
made a big difference.
that sounds, I mean, what an amazing opportunity to have. But, you said that you showed up, you're like, I made it to Microsoft. He's waiting for you to ask the question. So why you? Out of
He
all
said
the students that were there, why you?
he said he saw something in me that he still see. He told me this like last year too. He's like, I see something in you that I still see now, which is passion. They always used to say they wanted to assess for passion. And I always feel like that is so subjective. So I hate trying to do that. But
Yeah.
what he said to me then was he said, look, you are someone whose passion for technology just shows up. You don't have to try. It's just there. And I think, like, for those of you in chat who've ever watched my streams, who've ever seen me at a conference, who've ever seen me on Twitter, who've ever caught me on like a video, like, I think y'all would probably say the same thing, which is, dude, it just sort of just comes out of you. That's always been me. There has been no, it's probably more evolved and honed now because I've gotten a little bit, but it's always been there. That's what he said he saw. And at that time, Microsoft, I mean, Mario was at Microsoft for shoot, probably 20 years. So it's not like, he just sees people randomly and he's like, blah, blah, blah. Like if he spot this in me, it probably comes from a real place.
Yeah.
Um, and so in that regard, I always say he took a chance on me. He's the one who introduced me to Mel. Mel put me in this rotation program when I joined the company full time, where I rotated around the company for 2 years, pretty much figuring out what I wanted to do. Same thing. Like, because I was an intern, we went to Bill Gates' house and I saw Mel there and met a bunch of other people who are lifelong friends. And I mean, it's just these are the connections that you do miss from
Yeah.
like not doing an internship. And I think it is a part of what makes getting into the industry harder when you don't come from that traditional background. You just don't have the relationships.
So you get into Microsoft, you're doing this internship. Like, what kind of stuff were you doing? What kind of work were you doing? And like, how did you like navigate to like, oh, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, because that experience taught me that I didn't want to be a professional developer. Um, so we get to get real deep into it. Yo, here's what happened, right? I'm gonna put my two internships because I had two internships, where it was like a 6 month internship, a 6 month break, and then another 6 month internship, right? They were very different internships. The first one, I had a manager whose name was Kevin. I won't give his last name because I don't want anyone to find him. But Kevin um, was us really, he was the definition of someone who was a really good sort of tech lead, but he wasn't good for growing talent, if that makes
Mm,
sense. So what
absolutely.
do I mean? He's like super solid in delivering projects, but when it comes to growing an intern, that's a very different skill set. Is a very different skill set. And he, I think, wanted to grow that skill set, that muscle, but he just was not as good. But here was the problem with Kevin. Kevin's manager, which is a guy named NJ, same thing, won't give his last name. NJ was really good at doing the broad leadership thing, organizational. NJ didn't know what to do with an intern. And so
Yeah.
midway through my first internship, Kevin gets moved to a different project and is no longer my manager. And I'm like, well, okay, well, y'all figure it out. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Versus, okay, so now I spend the first half of my internship being like, I'm not entirely sure that I know what I'm doing. But
Yeah.
that was the internship where I learned C sharp. I spent the second half of my internship really being like, eh, okay, what now? Like, what comes next? And so I didn't think I was going to get the offer to come back. And I actually did get an offer to come back. And the reason why they said they gave it to me was because every time they threw problems at me, I would figure them out. It's just how I've always been resourceful in that.
Yeah.
So then my second internship comes and I go to work in PowerPoint. I mean, not in PowerPoint, SharePoint, inside of Microsoft IT. And SharePoint, for those of y'all who have never worked with SharePoint, SharePoint is a product that legitimately it even mentioning it brings back pain. It's a triggering product.
So
It
just
is not a product that you're like, ugh.
we
Yeah,
used
yeah,
SharePoint at my previous company, and I did a lot of SharePoint stuff.
yeah.
So you said SharePoint, and I immediately quivered.
See?
It's gotten better.
See?
I'll give the SharePoint teams some props. SharePoint has gotten better. I don't want to go back.
I love how many people in chat are like, oh God,
You said
SharePoint.
SharePoint, and like chat is just like the PTSD is coming out in
Oh, it's
chat right
real.
now.
But I'll tell you
Absolutely.
what, I had a manager, my manager there, his name was Jad. I love Jad. I still love Jad. I used to run into Jad randomly around Redmond and we would just like chat for like at least 30 minutes. Um, Jad was a rock star developer who was also really good at mentoring. Both him and another person who I worked with whose name was Elia. I'll never forget them. Um, because they taught me how to do rockstar JavaScript before jQuery existed, right? And this is like, because jQuery solved a lot of problems, and I still hate JavaScript. Like JavaScript at that time was the Wild West because it was 18 different ways to do one thing. I hate it.
Yep.
There's still like 19 ways to do one thing. I still hate
Absolutely.
it. But because of the stuff that we were doing to work around how terrible SharePoint was, I ended up becoming a really solid JavaScript developer. And at that time, Dad was like, look, we want you to come back to Microsoft, but we don't want you to come back to SharePoint because this isn't it for you. And I didn't realize how much of a gift that was. Because at the time I was bummed. And then I
Yeah.
talked to Mel, and Mel was like, listen, I'm going to take care of you. Like, you're a solid engineer. I'm going to give you an opportunity to come back into the company, figure out what that thing is for you. That's how I ended up leaving Microsoft. My second internship, getting a rejection to come back, but a job offer to come back, which is
Wow.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy how that worked out. So, okay, so you go in, you do some work, you had to suffer through the SharePoint era, but got some JavaScript experience. So you get hired on at Microsoft. What are you doing at Microsoft at that point?
I joined a rotation program. It was called the Accelerated Professional Experiences Program. And for those unfamiliar with these, there are a lot of really large companies who use these type of programs to accelerate the development of their high potential employees. These
Mm,
are folks who, when they do their performance rankings and they consistently see them earning in like incredibly high rankings, they're saying, okay, we want to position them to continue to stay and grow within the company. Right. So the model for what we called Apex, because that's what it was called, the model for Apex was not incredibly new necessarily. It's things that have been done at other companies as well, especially of that size, because they still do these programs. The thing that is unique about Apex is that it's targeting people who are just starting their careers. So you
okay.
don't quite know what it is that you want to do or how to accelerate your development because you're still so early. So my very first job, I worked on a team, oh God, whose name I can't remember. But it was like a skunkworks team where we would work on um things that were of strategic interest to Microsoft IT,
Right.
um, or really to Microsoft, but from an IT perspective. This is how I get exposure to Azure before Azure is even Azure. This was when Ray Ozzie was still at the company,
Mhm.
had just sort of integrated live mesh into the company. Um, in that role, it's pretty much a okay, you see an opportunity, you go for it. Had a phenomenal manager and a woman named Deb Brackow, who's just still amazing. And she was someone who helped me to realize a trend. I do my best work under female managers. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not entirely sure that it's a female versus male thing. But when I look
Sure.
at my performance history, like 9 times out of 10, if I was a rock star, it was because it was in part while I was under a female manager. I've noticed this. It's fascinating.
Do you, so do you think that maybe that management personalities are different, or do you feel like it's like, because I do think that there's some like psychology in there of just like how people are wired
Yeah.
and who they work with best and things like that. Like, what do you think that is, or is that just like it happens to be that way and you're not really sure why?
I would venture to say yes and. I think there's definitely some psychology to it. I also think what I've learned over the years that a lot of people you can't teach this. You only have to go through it to learn this. Is this
Mm,
notion of what do you need in order to succeed? Like what type of management do you need to succeed? So
yeah,
I'm the type of person who, at this stage in my career, I need sort of less hand holding, sort of give me the big problem, let me go figure out how I'll carve at it, and then come back at you and just guide me, right? Small guided tips, as
yeah.
opposed to like at that point, I need a very direct sort of no, go do this thing and only focus on this thing. And if you do anything more than that, you're not doing the thing that's important to me, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that I got that from the managers that I had at that time. Not that they weren't good, I just didn't get that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of times there's this problem, like, and I think Sociable Steve alluded to this earlier in chat. I saw it go through. Like, just because you're a good lead developer doesn't mean you're a good people leader. And
Yes.
I think that a lot of times you have situations where, like, I've seen it in smaller companies where you have somebody who has moved into a management role simply because of their tenure. It's like, "Oh, you've been here for a really long time. You should be a manager." Well, if that person doesn't enjoy managing people and doesn't even like that aspect of their job, they're not gonna be a good manager. But I think that you have to you have to give people the opportunity to, if you want to manage people and you wanna manage teams, and that's something that you're passionate about and you're good at, or that's something that you want to work on, then absolutely there should be a pathway for that. But you should also be empowered to say, I want to be a solutions architect, and that's fine. I want to
Yeah.
be a team lead, and that's fine because that's what I'm good at and that's what I enjoy doing. But a
Yeah.
lot of times it's this situation of, well, we need somebody to manage the team. You've been here the longest. Go manage. And you
This
end
is
up in these situations where it's like really bad. Like, really bad.
this is one of those things too where you almost don't create the culture for that manager to say, "Hey, I'm not good." So I love what Scott said. Scott was like, "No, that was me. I was not a good manager, even though I was a good engineer." Not a lot of people can say I'm not good at managing people. Right? Like I
Yeah. I mean, that's huge because the thing is so like for context for people who are just joining or who don't know my story, I was a full-time developer for 13 years and now I'm a developer evangelist. I would never go back to full-time development. I love what I do. I love being able to have the opportunity to interact with people and help them with their problems and empower them to succeed and do all of those things. And I had people tell me, "Well, you're not coding 24/7. You must not love programming." And it's like, "No, I enjoy programming, but I also enjoy people. I enjoy this."
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah.
this, I think that leads us into a really good point of being in science and technology or being in programming doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be an engineer in a dark little cave, isolated by yourself, hunched over your keyboard, sitting there hacking away at the keyboard all day long. Like, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of different opportunities here.
Yeah, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, and shout out to Apex because I'm literally talking about it now. Apex is the reason why I got exposed to developer event. Because I was a developer evangelist at Microsoft through Apex and had responsibility for high school students and converting them to developers. Um, every job after that, and you'll notice it. Like my internship is probably the only job that I had where I was a developer. Every job I've had after that has been software related, helping to ship product in one way, shape, or form and get that product in the hands of some customer. And I have been incredibly excited to tell this story because I just don't believe everyone is built to be a developer, and that's okay, right? Like everyone, I wish in my heart of hearts, if I could do anything and close my eyes in this industry, there was one thing I could do, it would be create a pathway to developer evangelism. Because I sincerely think that more people would do incredibly well in this function if they understood that it existed, they understood why it existed, and if they understood how to bring themselves into this in a way that will enable them to be successful. If that's the one thing I could do, that would be it. I would want that to be my legacy.
Well, because I didn't even realize that developer evangelism or advocacy or whatever title you want to put on it, I didn't even realize 2 years ago that this role existed.
Well,
So
and
for
you've been doing it for that whole period of time.
well, so like I got started with Twitch. I want to say I signed up for a Twitch account back in 2019 is when I actually created my Twitch account. And the very first live coder that I came across was our friend Clarkio.
Right. That's why I remember
And
seeing you actually for the first time.
and so I'm in Clarkio's chat, and the magic for me was that first moment when because like Twitch gives you the like, hey, you're new here, say hi. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, hi Clarkio. And he stops what he's doing. Oh, hi ToeFrog, welcome to the
Yes.
stream. That was
Yeah.
magic. I was like, holy crap, there's this person that I'm watching who actually just interacted with me
Yeah.
live. Like, this is real. This is really happening. And so, like, I originally got into it looking for people who were doing code because I didn't realize that people actually did this on Twitch. Because I was under the impression that like Twitch was just programming or just
Yeah.
gaming and nobody did anything else. And I love video games, but I suck at them. So nobody's going to watch me play video games, right? So I go in and I'm watching this and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Who is this Clarkio guy? And I go and I'm like, oh, he's a developer, well, evangelist. Is he like a preacher? Like, what is he doing? Like, I don't get it. And then, I stumble across, Bald Bearded Builder, and then I followed White Panther, and then I found your channel, and then I found, Hecky B and
Yeah.
Layla, and I started getting involved. And so I actually had a conversation with, BBB, Michael Jolly, and I was like, okay, what exactly is this? And why did you make the change? And he
Mhm.
very simply stated, like, I made the change from being a full time developer to being a developer evangelist because while I love technology and I love building stuff, there's something about empowering someone else and helping them to be successful and cheering them on during the process and getting to celebrate their success that for me was, so much better than me building an app and shipping it.
Yeah.
And it was like all of a sudden, like, the light bulb goes on, fireworks go off, and I said, I want this, I need this in my life. This is it. This is what I've been looking for. And that's really what basically pushed me to start positioning myself to, okay, how do I get into this? Because for a lot of positions, even my current position that I'm currently in, I submitted my resume and got auto rejected
Yep.
from everything that I applied for
Yep.
because I didn't have any prior official experience. And so I'm sure that there's a bunch of people who are in chat who are like, how do you work at Twilio if you got auto rejected? And that's like a whole another conversation of like serendipitously, like why you should network with people who are in the industry. But yeah, I think that you have a lot of people who, they don't really realize that to be a developer, you don't necessarily have to sit behind a keyboard all day long, just
Yeah.
hacking away and shipping code.
Yeah. This is I often say I think software is magic, and I'm gonna find a better way to say this because I got this from Microsoft. That's actually where I heard it first. I don't know where. Um, I think it was Satya Nadella when he took over the company. Because at that point I was working for PowerPoint, and then I moved into Microsoft Consulting. And they had changed like the Microsoft, they had changed the Microsoft, I think, mission to be something around, sharing the magic of software. And I had to stop and think about it. And I was like, wait, software really is magic. Because most people have no concept of sort of how things work. I mean, even I don't. Like I know I write a bunch of code. I know it translates into something called intermediate language. I know at some point the processor looks at that and says, okay, let's do a thing, translate it, and then that turns into ones and zeros. And then at some point the processor processes those ones. If you ask me the ins and outs of how all that works, I'm gonna be like, oh, it's not my job. Right. Like, and it's not that I don't care. Right. It's just it's the matrix. Literally.
Yeah,
So but I do sincerely think of our jobs as evangelists, as sort of part therapist, part like magic school teachers. Like we're like the Hogwarts professors, like part like fun, right? Like we are the bringers of fun because legitimately we like people will come to us with their pain and it can be real pain, it could be software pain, it could be like just pain. And part of our job is to not only empathize with where they are, no matter what that pain is, but also help them find their way through. And that empowering piece is what I call like it's the magic of evangelism. That's how we sort of do this well, right? So I feel blessed that I found evangelism then. Even though I like I said, after I did evangelism at Microsoft, I would never do it again. It's a whole other story. I was fortunate that when Twilio was looking for a .NET evangelist, I popped up on their radar. And shout out to Ted Kleber, who I love. Ted Kleber's still at Twilio. And Devin Rader. The two of them were the ones who convinced me like to continue talking to Twilio and to continue thinking about whether this could be the right place for me. And now 5 years later, shout out to my 5 year chucks.
there you
5 years
go.
later, I'm still here, kicking butt.
Yeah, and man, it is. I love working with you. I gotta say, I'm not just saying that. For everybody in chat, I tell this to Corey when we're not live on stream. Like I genuinely love working with Corey.
Dude
What
came up in a conversation yesterday too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um so you make this change. I'm curious, like, we all know that technology for the longest time, and you talked about it like with Microsoft at the time when you started getting in, and it was only like around 67,000 people.
Yeah.
Technology is still seen as this realm that is primarily dominated by middle-aged white men. And we tend to see a lot of gatekeeping going on, and a lot of slammed doors, and a lot of you don't belong here kind of attitude. How has that stereotype of what the technology industry is affected you as a black man being in the science and tech industry as a programmer? And what kind of obstacles have you had to face throughout your career, and not just your career, but like your education getting here?
Yeah. I my undergraduate, my elementary school through high school through undergraduate experience is very uncommon because I went to predominantly black schools throughout all of my life until I got into industry. So it's in that regard, I understood. I was very aware of my race as well as the challenges that come with that
Mm,
without quite ever being confronted with it on a day-to-day basis. I'll give you an example. There are a bunch of black students who, and this is I'm going to anonymize the story because I didn't get permission to tell these stories.
yeah,
There are
absolutely.
a bunch of black students who have gone through computer science programs at predominantly white institutions who've said legitimately they've dropped out because either things were being racially insensitive with respect to how the professor was teaching, with respect to how the students were handling things, and the university not sort of reprimanding folks, or
Mm,
even with respect to sourcing opportunities and looking for jobs and being like, look, how come these jobs aren't being pushed my way? It's one of the questions I ask a lot of people who are of color or who come from an underrepresented community in tech is what's it like to be one of the onlys? Because there's like almost universally a scenario where we are the only one in the room. And
mm,
so for me, if I had to answer that question, what I've had to learn over the years is to not um, minimize it, right? To not to recognize that that comes with power because it brings perspective that other people don't have at the table, right? Um, but I am at a place in my career where I feel confident and comfortable to do so.
Yeah.
Corey circa, 2000 and I think 5 or 6 when I'm at Microsoft and I'm still figuring things out. I'm sitting there as quiet as a church mouse. You will not get me to say a word. Um, Versus now, I have no problem being like, "Yo, that's messed up. I can't believe you would say that." And so there's all these questions that come with certain experiences. Like I've had experiences sometimes at Twilio where I've had to be like, "Did you say that because I was black, or did you say that because I was a black man? Like, why'd you say that to me?" And people have positive intent. People are also ignorant sometimes. I am ignorant sometimes to the things that I say. So it's okay to apologize so long as you do it authentically.
Yeah.
But when people don't do that, or when they sort of dismiss or diminish, confront me in these sorts of ways, that's harder to deal with. Now I'm at a place where I'm better at it. Back in the day, it's a different Corey, different time.
Well, we had a really interesting conversation with our friend Ebony last week. Shout out to our friend Metal and Coffee, who is also on the Claw Stream team. And Ebony was talking about not only her experience as a person of color, but also as a female, and some of the things that she has to deal with. And she started her undergrad. She was going into programming, and she had a teacher's assistant. She was asking questions, trying to gain understanding, and the TA was like, you know, maybe this isn't for you. You did this all wrong. You might want to switch your major. And it's like in those situations, I I have a really hard time understanding like why people do that crap just in general. But, you know, how many times does somebody, diminish your opinion or judge your intelligence based on race or, some kind of external like I am always under the impression, let's just treat people like people. Like obviously, I recognize that you're a black man. I celebrate, your heritage and your culture and your race, and I think that I had a really great conversation with a friend, and he was like, "Yeah, I have some friends who are like, oh, I don't even see you as black." It was like, "Well, come on now,
That's
like
not the right answer.
that's like it's coming from. I think that statement, while being ignorant, is coming from a good place. I think it's this idea of like, oh well, I'm not judging you based on XYZ or whatever. I don't like I'm an Italian American. My grandfather was a Sicilian immigrant. And I love my Italian heritage. I love to talk about Italian food and all of that kind of stuff, and that helps make up who I am. And that makes up my experience. But like let's not try to like say that, oh, I don't see you as because like we all have history, we all have story, we all have culture. And I think the problem is getting to a point as a culture, not just in science and tech, but like in general, where we're able to see past the stereotypes of all of that crap and be like, just like you and I are right now, like you have a completely different world and life experience than I do.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about that. Educate me as to what it's like because I'm never going to understand what it's like to be a black man.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing that I always struggle with whenever people say, "I don't see your race." I think in spite of their intentions, and I always assume positive intent, in spite of their intentions, they don't understand the impact that that statement has. And
Mm.
when I think about that in the context of being in the tech industry, where I say this all the time, we keep saying over and over, like all these companies, Twilio's guilty of this as well. Oh, we've got a chief diversity person. We're making a lot of changes. We're doing all these things. Well, the statistics aren't reflecting that. Specifically, when I think about Black people, when it comes to women, different discussion. We're getting a lot better when it comes to creating space and inviting women to the table and making sure that they are included, as opposed to, well, you got the seat, so you should be thankful. That's another
Mm.
problem. But when it comes to Black folks, like even when you look at our leadership team within the company, like How many black folks do you see? If you look at just the leadership team of our team, there's not that many black folks. And so I think we often are just missing the mark when it comes to this. Now, I'm going to be really intentional in saying I realize that Twilio is a global company. And so diversity and inclusion from an ethnic perspective means something very different in the global context. And
Yeah.
with that in mind, I think it introduces very particular goals. What I think we as black folk keep asking for, and we keep advocating for this across the board, even outside of tech, is yo, just don't forget about us. Like, right? Like, we shouldn't be the last thought. We shouldn't be just coming in after the fact because we're coming from behind already because of systemic racism. So let's just be honest about it and level the playing field accordingly. That's
Yeah.
how
I
I see it.
wonder, I, in your opinion, do you feel like the lack of representation? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is involved here, but I wonder how much um, of technology availability, you have a socioeconomic component to
Of
this
course.
because you have so many people who are black who live in poverty who do not have the exact same opportunities as other people. And so in these situations, you know, what would the playing field look like or what would the professional world look like if you had more people who were in lower income scenarios or they don't necessarily have equitable education scenarios, if they had the exact same opportunity to get their hands on these things and discover the passion for programming or tech or because I think you have so many people who as a child they're never exposed to it, they don't even realize it's a possibility, like
Yep.
because when I grew up I thought that programming was just done by super smart people in a lab somewhere.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I could actually get on my computer and just like download stuff and go to town. I didn't even know. I was completely ignorant of that. But thankfully I went to schools that had computers in the classroom, and I was one of the people who actually had a compute. Like I remember our very first home computer was a 386 with floppy drives, and so I'm very privileged when it comes to that. But you have so many people who they don't have a home computer.
Yep. Yeah, my take on this is hard because it's very multifaceted. Like the personal component, what I think if we looked at this through a political lens, I think Republicans would say there's a personal responsibility. You give people a computer, they should do things in a responsible way that will uplift them from poverty, blah, 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 blah. And then if you look at this from a Democratic lens, they'd say, well, but they're coming from behind, so the government should do some stuff to give them a leg up. And in that regard, we start to level the playing field. Here's where I fall. I think there is no silver bullet to this, but there are a bunch of problems across the board.
Mm,
And it starts very intentionally with where resources are deployed. So I think about the scenarios that we talked about earlier with COVID and internet access, and how a lot of people in their local neighborhoods who work in the tech industry didn't realize how many other people had families at their schools where their students attend, where they go home, they don't have access to the internet.
mm,
Most people forget that um, school lunch is the predominant way that homeless students eat food, and the proportion of homeless students as a representation across the number of students that go to public school is significantly higher than folks would imagine. Same is true for poverty, right? There are more, specifically in the United States, there are more white people in poverty than there are black people. But we still end up in a scenario where black people continue to be disenfranchised. And that's because of systemic bias. That's because of things put into the law. That's because of stuff that stops us from having access. And so when people
mm.
say, oh, well, I come from a disenfranchised community too. So how come they should get a chance to get access above me, even if they're not as qualified? This is where affirmative action starts to cause a lot of problems because they misinterpret why affirmative action exists. God, I won't get into the history of the law, but I will
Yeah.
say this is a scenario where like all of these things combine and start to show up in these individualized ways where you have kids in a single parent household where money is just not enough to get by. And so they just don't have access to the same means.
Mm.
And asking the government to do more to help them is looked at through the political lens as opposed to the sociological lens. Ah,
Well, and I
God, let me
think that
not
you
go through.
have no, I think that you have too many people who turn this into. I really hate it when it turns into like a Democrat Republican issue
Yes.
because this is not a political issue. This is a people issue. You're talking about people and you're talking about the lives of people. And we in the States we tend to dilute it into this. Oh, if you lean towards this side, then you belong to this group.
Right.
And if you lean to this side, you belong to this group. Because I think that everybody across the board will say, no matter how much opportunity is given, like even if like you know pluck any person out of whatever scenario that they're in, there is still the aspect of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Like you have obviously worked very hard to get where you are. But that being said, that is not the only solution. Like it's not just, oh, well, you need to work harder. Like I think that there is this it's this mentality that it has to be one or the other. Or that this one thing is the answer across and I really get bothered when people try to turn complicated issues into these black and white, let's just pass some legislation and it's going to take, it doesn't work like that. At the end of the day, it just doesn't work like that. And so I think that people, regardless of their political affiliation, need to realize that talking about things like implicit bias, we're not talking about, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, and I'm trying to be pretty sensitive here
Yeah.
because I don't necessarily want this to turn into like a chat debate on
Yeah. Don't do
politics.
that.
Okay. So, regardless of the spectrum that you fall on, talking about internal bias and things like that, you're not necessarily like if I start talking about like I have implicit bias that has been taught to me over years upon years upon years, and that is something that I personally have to work to keep in check. I think every person can agree to that. That we all have implicit biases, all of those things. When you start talking about implicit bias, that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, now we're getting into critical race theory, and now we're just trying to say that everybody in this political group is bad or this person group. Like everybody just needs to chill and stop for a second because, like, I can realize in myself that I have implicit bias when I look at people that has been taught to me over time, and I have to make a conscious effort to not do that. I have to ask myself questions like, well, why am I thinking this? Or why is this my initial reaction? And I think that that is one of the starting points to people realizing the things that they have learned and what's been, because I do think that people are making progress because we're
Yeah.
obviously not where we were at when you look at like the 50s and 60s and segregation and things like that.
Yep.
Got a long way to go. We can all agree on that. We have a long way to go. But I think that you have like generational changes that are happening where people are saying, well, hey, it's not okay to think this way. These stereotypes are not okay. These things that have always been are no longer going to be the norm. And people are getting to where they are stepping out and speaking out against those things. Now, what I think my personal responsibility is to understand more of what it's like for the experiences of those who do not look like me and are not my gender, and understand the kinds of things that they have to deal with. Like, I'm never going to understand what it's like to be a black man in tech.
Right.
Never, because I'm not a black man in tech. But what can I learn from people who are black? And how can I help support them and be an ally for them? And when shenanigans are happening, step up and be like, that's not going to fly. Or giving opportunities for people who are in situations where they wouldn't have the opportunities. Like, how can I use my position to try to help uplift somebody else and try to give them opportunities? Or what can I do to help mentor somebody? And, like, I know I'm not going to solve all the world's problems, but it's like asking the question, what can I do?
This is where I like Sean's comment. Sean dropped a comment in chat. He said, "It's easier to work harder if you're not worried about where your next meal is coming from." People who never missed a meal or never seen a utility disconnect notice can't imagine the effect that that has on someone's ability to work harder. Why I love that comment is because that transcends political affiliation, race, ethnicity, gender. It is a very human experience. What I Where I start to introduce those filters is who has power. And this is one thing that's incredibly important that people often forget about when we talk about racism and the need for diversity and inclusion as an explicit like function. If I say, "Hey, look, I'm struggling, and these are the reasons why, my utility bill just got cut off. I'm not making enough to make ends." The odds of someone listening to me, if that person doesn't look like me, not as high. And we've seen this in the research. There's a ton of research about this, specifically about the psychological aspect of this.
Yeah.
Then there's the other side to this, which is I point to Donald Trump here, not necessarily because um I am anti-Republican. No, very much I'm anti-Donald Trump. And I have no problem saying that.
Sure.
Because the thing that I think a lot of people don't think about when you think about what's insensitive is Donald Trump said, look, he wants to make America great again. A lot of black people said, when the hell was America great for black people? And if you think about that question, you can point to specific time periods, and I can tell you in those time periods when things were codified in law that stopped black people from succeeding. And so when I think about the pathway of tech, one of the things that I loved about the pathway of tech, and I still think is true, is tech can be a great equalizing force for black people to gain wealth. Because
Mm.
there have been so many instances throughout history where things have been codified in law and legislated in such a way so punitively, disproportionately against black folk that we've not been able to gain entry. But that's why it literally is. We're not starting at the same position. But when it comes to tech, you could be in prison now with phones, which means you could be in prison learning how to grow and do the things. Not to say that all black folks are in prison, but because overwhelmingly the prison population is
Right.
right. The same thing is true for folks who come from under impoverished neighborhoods, underrepresented communities. And so with this being the case, like I continue to be inspired by tech because I think it will create a way. Like I think about Marcus Bullock. Marcus Bullock started a thing called Flick Shop. He too was incarcerated at some point. Um, Came out, wanted to create a pathway for folks out of prison into tech. Has been telling his story in many ways. We featured him at Twilio as a part of one of our Twilio After Hours events. Just
Mhm.
amazing story. We just don't hear enough about these things, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I'm like, we need more representation. We need more representation in all the levels. That way we can make sure that folks have a seat at the table to influence outcomes.
Yeah.
That's my black experience. I'll leave it there. I'm sure there are
No,
others that people
absolutely.
could share.
I'm just letting it sit.
Yeah.
Um, just because I think there's a lot to digest in that statement.
Well, it's kind of like my hat, right? Shout out to Anthurium. She shouted it out earlier. She said, "Hey, I love your hat." And I am intentional about representing pieces of myself in different ways on stream. Today I happen to shave, but because it's snowing and the temperatures are acting the fool and my Tesla acted up yesterday, like I had to leave my garage door open. So my first floor is incredibly cold right now, right? So I got a hat on to keep me warm. But this
Yeah.
hat is one that means something very different if I am in Hawaii versus amongst my fraternity brothers versus just in mixed company. And
Right.
so I love this because this hat means something specific to me, but I get to tell that story, right? So yeah, yeah, it's a fun thing. It's a part of how being black is super cool and special and exciting to me.
No, absolutely. And I think that I just think having the opportunity to have more of those conversations is just what what is so important of people being able to, because I will openly admit being a white man and asking the question, what is it like to be black, is a very uncomfortable question for me to ask.
Yeah.
And I think that you have a lot of people who, for a long time, have basically just not asked anything because they're afraid of saying something incorrectly
Yeah.
or making a misstep or something like that. So like the only thing that I ever ask of people is like if I say something that is insensitive or offensive or something like that, just
Yeah.
call me out on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just call me out, because how else am I going to learn? You know, because
Yeah.
I'm guilty of making, long ago I'm guilty of making a statement to a friend of, oh, I don't see you as black, like I don't see that when I look at you, which education and experience tell me that that's not the right statement to make,
All right.
you know but I think and you know it's that getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Well, and the same is true on my end, right? Like I am someone, me and my boys get into this because I have a daughter and a son. And my daughter raising a girl very different than raising a boy. And it's made me more aware of things that could be happening to her that she may not be as comfortable or willing to talk up about, but I still have to sort of be present, aware of, knowledgeable of to be able to support her. Oh my God. Like it's we all have these things where there are limits to how we show up in the world. We cannot experience the world through everyone's eyes, but we can be freaking empathetic, right? Like it's okay to
Yeah,
say I'm sorry and just hug someone and that's it. Don't try to solve the problem. Don't try to say, well, that's not right. Let's go do something about it. Don't try to say, oh, they shouldn't have did that. Just create space for them to show up when and how they choose. Um, and so, it's the same for I say for members of the LGBTQ plus community. It's the same for uh folks who are a part of the Native American community. It's the same for folks who continue to be disenfranchised and we don't know, right? Like, just create space and let people show up as they need to. That's it.
absolutely. So Niels has a really good question. He's asking,
What's
what
Niels'
what
question?
does the symbol mean to you?
Oh, this is the phi. So, okay, so fraternities and sororities mean something very different in black Greek letter organizations. So a lot of folks, like if you pledge like a fraternity or sorority, a lot of folks think, oh, it's just a college. When you pledge a black fraternity or sorority, it's a lifelong commitment. It's a lifelong commitment to
Really?
service. Yeah.
So I never did any of the like fraternity. So like when for context, when I went to college, I
Yeah.
did a commuter college. So I like worked all
Yeah. You
day,
like no
drove
context
to
of this
school,
life.
no context. None.
Yeah. I so this again sort of goes back to the notion of like the differences in our experiences.
Mhm.
My fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, shout out to the Alphas. We are the first Black Greek letter organization in the States.
Okay.
The only organization that is not a secret society that predates us, but it's also not a Greek letter organization is the Masons, as Roberta Bull shouts out. But um, Alpha was founded in 1906 at Cornell University in Ithaca, specifically because we needed a way to bring Black people together. And specifically in this case, it was Black men who founded the fraternity. We had
Mm.
women, the women played a significant role. I won't get too history. But I know the history. But one of the things that we do to recognize each other when we're out and about is we all throw up hand symbols. And for us, it's what we call the phi. 'Cause this looks like the phi. the Greek letter phi when you throw it upright like this. So I got mine up on the hat. There's rules around what you can wear and what you can't wear. So you can't quite tell that this is an alpha thing, but it's absolutely an alpha thing. Yes, I
Right.
call myself an alpha male, but not in the toxic, like,
Yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah.
he's an alpha male. You must show up a certain way. No, 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 no.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's amazing, and yeah, so I really never got to do any of the sorority or
Fraternity
fraternity
things.
stuff. Like I that was living on campus and like all of that whole experience. Like I never had it. I'm totally okay with it. You know,
Dude,
I necessarily wouldn't change my journey in that.
I, I'll tell you this, Howard. So shout out to Howard, and I say this all the time. Like a lot of folks don't understand why Howard University is so big in Black culture. Howard University is the founding location or chapter for like 7 of the 9 organ, Black Greek letter organizations.
Okay.
We didn't get founded there just because we got founded in Cornell, but our second chapter is at Howard, and it's incredibly important to the history. Like as a university, Howard did so much for uplifting Black people. Even still to this day, Howard graduates the largest number of Black PhDs in the United States out of any university, which is
Mm,
insane to me, right? Like to this
yeah,
day. But shout out to Howard because we're just that amazing. So I get to go sort of be a little bit braggadocious on my alma mater. And
yeah,
I get to say, like, yo, this is why these things are important because it's just a part of Black culture.
that's amazing. So okay, so outside of programming, outside
Yes.
of work, what do you do? What
I
are your
play the
things?
piano. So I love playing the piano. And my kids can't carry a tune to save their lives. So um the biggest thing that they've enjoyed is I figured out how to play the Angry Birds theme song on the piano. And every now and
Nice.
again, I'll just like randomly play that and they'll just crack up. But there's that. If anyone has ever watched my streams, they know we love to talk about food. I'm always cooking. Um, I'm still trying to figure out. My daughter asked me to make smash burgers this week, so we're gonna try to do a smash burger thing with some
Ooh,
French
yeah.
fries. But I try incredibly hard to make as much stuff as possible as fresh. Um, I'm getting back into reading. So somewhere in my professional career, I got my MBA. And
Mhm.
for those of you who've never done an MBA, I want to say about 3/4 of it is reading business cases. Like I kid you not, you will read like business cases that probably average 15 pages, right? So after I finished business school in 2017, I just stopped reading. Like, don't ask me to read anything. I can't. It's
Yeah.
just hard. So I'm getting back into reading. And then, I'm planting now. My son's plant is over in the corner, and it's introduced all these gnats into my house. So we're learning about how to get rid of gnats from houseplants.
Nice.
And a video game. Like I was playing not last night, the night before. Last night I had a crazy migraine. But the night before I was playing Far Cry 6 cuz I'm late. I'm like always late on my video games.
Yeah, same.
So, yeah, like cuz I'm like you, like I don't game well. So I don't think anyone would ever want to watch me.
No, so I have a Switch. I did very briefly I did a stint where I would do like Friday night games. And it was basically me sucking at The Legend of Zelda and dying over and over again, and Finite Singularity heckling me and laughing in chat. Um,
Wow.
I I do have to ask. So, with your French fries, do you happen to own an air fryer?
Okay. So accidentally I do. I don't like air fryers. I'm very controversial in my opinion. I do not like air fryers. I
Okay,
don't
I gotta
believe
know
that they
why.
should be a thing because they're just convection ovens. So, from my opinion, I'm like, just use the oven. Like, I mean, I get it. It's a convection oven. The okay, okay. Let me take a step back. I don't know how much people know about like cooking technology, but air fryers are not fryers.
They're
Fryers
not
require
fryers. I
oil.
agree.
Like, you need to have oil, and the oil has to be heated for it to be a fryer. Air
Yes.
fryers are convection ovens. The difference between a conventional oven and a convection oven is the air is recirculated inside of the oven. That's the only difference. It's a freaking marketing tactic. But I like convection ovens, right? So I like to use my
Yeah.
convection oven for specific purposes. Um, but I don't air fry my French fries. I double fry my French fries. So I do a parboil on them real quick. I drop them in for about a minute. I take them out. I freeze them. And then when I'm ready to cook them, I drop them in for like 4
Yeah.
minutes.
So Roberta Bowles and X90 are shouting out the Instant Pot. And so I do have an
I love the
Instant
Instapot.
Pot.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a story that my dad used to tell me about a long, long time ago. He worked at Popeyes. And he said that working at Popeyes, like it made him realize why the chicken was so good because they got the chicken in, they hand battered all of the chicken, they double battered it, and then you
Yes.
essentially cooked it. You didn't like drop it into a fryer, you essentially put it into a pressure cooker, which is what an instant pot is.
Yeah. That's right.
You would drop the chicken in the oil in a pressure cooker and you would lock the pressure cooker
Oh my
and
goodness.
so you would fry the chicken in this pressure cooker, and then when you took it out, that's why the chicken was so delicious and moist and crunchy. And because you would fry it in there, and then you would do like a quick bake on it afterwards,
I
just
mean
to crisp
that,
it up.
but this is okay. Okay, first of all, I'm salivating. I had to close my mouth. I felt like I was drooling on
Yeah, it's getting to be lunchtime.
because I'm legitimately like, because I love, there's two things that I love right now. One is I love my sous vide. I love cooking stuff sous vide because I'm trying to reduce the amount of fat that I use and the amount of oil that I use in my
Translate that for those of us less educated in that.
good, perfect. So one of the things that I learned, I read this book called The Science of Cooking, from Cooks Illustrated. An amazing book. If you ever
Okay.
want to understand like how to like the science behind how to cook, that book is one that I recommend, but it's a very big book. And one of the things that they talk about in there is how to cook meat specifically. I'm using meat as the, and what they tell you is a lot of people think, oh, you're supposed to sear it off and lock in the flavor and then like put it in the oven, but you don't know
Right.
why. The reason why is because um, everything likes to be cooked gently. Fish likes to be cooked gently. Shrimp likes to be cooked gently. So does steak. Like meat likes to be cooked gently, but we love that char flavor that comes from the effect of hot oil and dropping it in the pan and searing it. So
Yep.
what you do with sous vide is instead of putting it in an oven, which is like one of the more gentle ways of cooking, put it
Sure.
in a water bath and you regulate the temperature of the water so that it stays the same. So cooking
Interesting.
sous vide means you're cooking in a water bath. And you can cook anything sous vide. There's an egg that they do sous vide that is supposed to be phenomenal. I've never tried it. Um,
Huh.
but now I cook almost all of the meat that I use for my salads during the week sous vide style. So I put it in, like I season it up with a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, some fresh herbs, a little bit of garlic, a little bit of lemon, add just a touch of olive oil, add it to like a Ziploc bag and remove the air, and then just put that in a water bath and let that sit for about an hour at 155 degrees. I promise
Really?
you, it'll be the most tender meat you've ever had.
That's incredibly interesting. I was actually having a conversation with my wife the other day about how I would love to just take a cooking class. I'd also love to do like baking, like actual like proper baking, because I love the science that goes into baking, whether it's breads or whether it's pastries. Too bad that we don't have Copper Beardy in chat because I know that he
Yeah.
does a ton of like all the time. I'm like, please send me your stuff. Just vacuum seal it and send it to me. I don't care how much it costs because I'm like I've never learned how to do any of that stuff, but it's fascinating to me, and so that's
Listen,
definitely like on my list of things to do.
I am in a motion now where I am, as you asked me, am I reading? I've been buying food books like crazy. And I
Yeah.
think it's because, like, it's usually on Friday mornings I work out of Barnes and Noble. So I think it's because I'm sitting in Barnes and Noble hungry. I really do think that. Um, but with that being the case, I think we may be onto something. We should totally get the DevRel team at Twilio to publish a cookbook. I
Mm.
sincerely believe that people would be interested in this cookbook.
Well, everybody in chat knows that you get a couple of Twillions together in a room. There are two guaranteed things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about food, and we're
Yes.
going to talk about swag.
Yes.
That's what it's all about. Like we don't actually do work at Twilio. We talk about food and we talk about our swag or what swag we're going to want next.
That's exactly right. Well, the thing is, and don't get us wrong, like y'all see us do this on stream. I promise you, this also happens in team meetings. Like I kid you not, we've got Kelly Robinson, who I love, K Robs. Kelly Robinson has like an Instagram of just like food photos. And I guarantee we'll sit there and just be like, oh man, that's how you posted that photo.
How did
Oh,
I not know about this?
oh yes, I'm gonna point this to you because K
Oh my
Robs is
gosh.
amazing.
I did not know about this. I've been lied to for like 6 months. That should have been in my onboarding docs is follow these Instagram pages. What the heck?
Yeah, she I've shout out to Kelly. I love Kelly. Every time I go to New York, I stop by and we have food together. But I promise you, she is phenomenal. Like I'm good. She is phenomenal. And then Dom is our resident cocktail expert. Brent, we all know Brent has cooked a ton of amazing dishes.
And even
Great
streamed it.
vloggers. Yep, that's right. Like we should totally do a cookbook. I'm convinced. I
Yeah,
can
that
write like the epilogue.
absolutely. It's you just committed to it. It's on recording now. It,
Oh, so someone's gonna snip this. And then here we go. We're gonna have to go ahead and give this to Sandra and have Sandra do a Twitter poll and ask, hey, would developers in the community be interested in this? And
I'd
then next
be
thing you know, great idea.
I'm gonna open Slack and I'm sure I'm gonna see all of the pings of people clipping this and throwing it into the Twilio Slack. This is what Corey and Chris have committed to on
That's right,
stream in
right.
front of God and everybody. This is what's happening. It's official now. It's gonna happen.
Look, and I just saw the Discord server link too just drop. Someone's gonna drop that into Discord and be like, hey, I just heard they were doing this.
Yes. Yep. It's a thing. When's the ship date? How do I pre-order?
See?
There you
Shut
go.
up. You shut up.
All right, Corey. Well, man, I love you. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today and talking a bit about your background and your journey into technology. And, I know that, this is only episode 2. I'm definitely going to have you back just because it's fun.
Chris, I'm gonna throw some praise on you real quick. And chat room, Chris has no idea that I'm doing this.
I have no clue
Yesterday,
what's happening.
wait, well, Chris, let me ask, how long have you been at Twilio? Only like 6 months?
2 days ago, I officially hit 6 months.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So you've been at Twilio for half a year. Chat room, we did a thing, we do a thing inside of our marketing team where we give away awards to folks who are like remarkable, they do remarkable work and things, call it the bee's knees. And yesterday, the team behind Signal TV, which I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of, received the bee's knees from our team, the developer network, for delivering Signal TV last year, which was an amazing experience. But when I tell y'all, Chris was like the guy who, like if you ever need a guy, I think they call them the grip in the industry. If you ever need a guy who like just gets ish done, that's Chris. Like Chris is like, all right, how can I help? And so I threw like one problem at Chris, and he was like, yeah, I got it. Bam, 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 bam. Knock it out. Then Chris joins the next thing. Yes, key grip. That's right, X. Then the next thing, Chris is like, all right, yo, I got it. We're on top of it. Blah, 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 blah. Then in the middle of the show, Chris is working production and production goes down and Chris is still pushing the buttons with Joe Nash. Yeah, I got it. Bam, 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 bam. We need feedback. Chris is getting the feedback. Bam, I got it. Bam, 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 bam. When I tell you, like, it is so cool to watch you work. I can't. It's inspiring, man. People always say, like, I look like a machine. Dude, watching you work, you look like a machine. And you're getting it done with quality, with professionalism. I'm glad that you're on the team. I'm so glad that you've joined. I'm so glad that you're serving developers with us, man.
Man, thank you so much. Honestly, that means the world to me. And I'm just so thankful to have the opportunities I do and to be able to work alongside you and so many other amazing people. Like for real. Like I'm just super, super privileged and I cannot believe that I wake up and get to do this every day. So I'm so thankful for this. But thank you so much for those kind words. I appreciate you, man.
Absolutely.
Chat, give it up for our buddy Corey, the Hurricane Weathers, Dude, this conversation's been great. I appreciate you being here. We're going to go to a BRB and I will be right back. See ya, Corey. Thanks for joining.
See y'all soon.